From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. With today's host, Colin Donovan. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
A tremendous Friday to each and every one of you. Thanks so much for tuning in to EWTN's Open Line. Colin Donovan, our very own Vice President of Theology, is in the house ready to answer your questions. Grab one of these open phone lines at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985, and we'll even put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, openline@EWTN.com, or you can text your question to Colin. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question. Message and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams. Michael McCall producing the program. Your call screener and social media maven is Mr. Jeff Burson. So if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can type a question into the chat window, and it may find its way to us by the end of the program. And our host, as he is every Friday, Colin Donovan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, Jack. How you doing?
Any interesting reading come across your desk recently?
Well, yeah, we were sort of talking about it before the show. The Pope today promulgated something that had been in the works, and there had been various rumors about. It was an apostolic letter issued motu proprio, which means by his own hand, which generally means that a congregation didn't require this, but in some sense, this is something that he wanted and felt needed to be done. Other people had input, and it's called Traditiones Custodes, which has to do with the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite. Our listeners and viewers on YouTube and Facebook might recall that Pope Benedict XVI, in order to sort of reconcile traditionalist groups that continued to celebrate the Mass before the Council of the Mass of 1962, he liberalized greatly and gave great freedom to the practice of priests. Any priest celebrating the old form, or the extraordinary form, as he called it, of the Mass. And so the purpose of this was, of course, that for those people who, for whatever reason, are disaffected from the current liturgy, or who have just a special love and attraction to the old liturgy, that they would feel home in the church. And I think it did help in that effect. Especially with some groups in the church that weren't canonically situated, you might put it that way at the time, but following their own path. What Pope Francis has done is they first sent out a survey a year or so ago, surveying the bishops on the implementation of Benedict's motu proprio, and to find out what the effects were. Were they positive, were they negative, and what they were, and so on and so forth. And presumably, on the basis of this, certain conclusions were drawn that, some negative effects which the Pope and his counselors felt needed to be, resisted or reversed. And so they essentially, what the Pope's letter does is it tightens down the norms for its use, for the extraordinary form's use considerably, rejects, I think, some of the anticipatory conclusions that Pope Benedict had regarding the fruits that would come from it. I think Pope Benedict greatly hoped for tremendously good fruits of reconciliation and so on, especially with certain of the disparate groups like the Society of Pope St. Pius X and others. And that has come about in some measure. Pope Francis has been generous also with respect to sacramental faculties and so on in those cases. But I think he clearly sees, and others apparently advised him, that there was some resistance to the Second Vatican Council in and of itself and to the liturgical reform. So this is the main argument I think he makes in his letter. The details of the motu proprio itself in terms of its canonical effects and norms and so on, which don't at all apply to the missal as is being used in 99% of parishes, doesn't apply to the Mass which is said on EWTN, which is a Mass of the ordinary form within the rubrics of that Mass in its usages and so on, but would apply to those particular parishes that were set up to for people who wish to perhaps engage clergy to say the Mass for them in the extraordinary form, or to what extent associated with communities which say that Mass exclusively. So there are a number of provisions like that, which I think in the coming days, people we'll hear more and more about this. And I encourage people to follow the National Catholic Register, Catholic News Agency, and EWTN News Nightly, and other of our news services to keep up on that, because I think ongoing there will be commentary as well as a deeper understanding of the norms that have been issued and their implications are. It doesn't end the extraordinary form at all, but it clearly wants to set an obstacle to people sort of going in their own way in repudiation of the post-conciliar church. And we know that sentiment is out there. I don't think it's necessarily among Catholic traditionalists, although some of them do have it. But this is clearly part of the motivation, or perhaps even the major element of it, behind the motu proprio and the Pope's letter.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, but the council, the Second Vatican Council, was a legitimate council. The Novus Ordo liturgy is a legitimate liturgy. And as long as you adhere to those facts, this motu proprio should not cause you any distress, right?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case, because we all have our opinions, we all have our attractions and affections. There are a great many people, I know many of them, people who are dear friends who have a tremendous love for the extraordinary form. They don't harbor it as a contradiction to the Second Vatican Council or anything of that nature. Granted, what they're saying is some do. You could argue that there are people on the other end of the scale who are into liturgical abuse and other things who also contradict the council, because they don't have that authentic spirit which the documents sought to promote, and sort of been captured by the left in the church to run with in their own way. So there are extremes on all of these kinds of positions, whether it's the liturgy or other things in the Second Vatican Council documents. The point is, I don't think it's aimed at the great bulk of traditional Catholics who have a great love for this Mass and would like to continue to that was my point,
to
really participate in it. Yeah, I think that's the case. Yes.
Very good. If you'd like to be on the program, the number is 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. We have an email from Remington, and he has a question this is a question that I think a lot of people are afraid to ask sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
One, because they're embarrassed a little bit, and two, because they're afraid of what the answer might be. But he says, can you explain tithing and the church's expectation? What is proper for parishioners, and how much should they offer? For example, I know tithe means a tenth, but is 10% enough in today's world?
Well, the church's expectations are surprisingly rather modest. There is a lot of moral theology and canonical tradition behind what constitutes the workman deserves his hire. Remember, Christ himself said, the workman deserves his hire, referring to the ministers of redemption who are going to carry the gospel out. And so maintaining the church and maintaining what is necessary for the conduct of the church's mission is important. The general norm, which you find in a lot of the older moral theology and canonical manuals, is 2.5% of your income. That can be reduced by a great many things, including if one has tremendous debts to pay, you have to fulfill your obligations of justice to others. If you have responsibilities for family, you have lots of sick kids and you're caring for them, and all your money just goes every month, and all you can give is the widow's mite, the church will be content with that.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. It's a free phone call anywhere in North America. 833-288-3986. It's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
We want to invite you to pray the rosary with us. The rosary is many things, but perhaps the best way to think about the rosary is to think about it as a spiritual place, as an invisible chapel.
The Holy Rosary with Father Benedict Groeschel every night, 9:30 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Living the Beatitudes with Father Bjorn.
Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. If you're on a football team, you don't want to just run up and down the field holding the ball and never cross into the end zone and get a touchdown. We want to reach our goal, but there are a lot of obstacles, discouragement, and challenges along the way. Jesus' voice is the one calling us to say yes to him, to live the life that he is calling us to live. We have to choose one way or the other, choose him or not. But if we choose him, we will be opposed. We're going to have people challenge what we believe or call us crazy. But Jesus doesn't just say, come follow me, to follow a beatitude. He's calling us to be like himself. He is the Beatitudes. He doesn't just say, do what I say. He says, come follow me. He's with us every step of the way, transforming our weakness into strength. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
For more about the Beatitudes, visit EWTNRC.com.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@ewtn.com.
You know, we as Catholics should always be looking for ways to engage the culture and to edify ourselves. And a lot of the media and things that you can consume out there don't do that. But I can give you one place that does, and that's Church Pop. It's a very fun site. Some things irreverent, some things very holy, some things very sacred, but all of it 100% authentically Catholic. Check it out at churchpop.com, or you can actually log on to EWTN.com/subscriptions, and you can sign up to have an email dropped in your inbox every day. And I do that, and it's really good. Some very interesting things that come to my inbox every morning that I can check out on Church Pop. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. So, Colin, in light of your answer to our email question, what is a tithe?
Well, a tithe obviously has a biblical basis. That's where it comes from. Under the Old Covenant, the Jewish people, or the Israelites, the Jews generally being a subset of those who remained after the various destructions, and the obligation there was to render to God 1/10. So you had 1/10 of the grapes, and 1/10 of the oil, and 1/10 of everything. The first of the flock, an unblemished lamb, an unblemished goat, an unblemished bullock. All of these things were to render to God for the gifts that God gives us. So in the Christian perspective, the tithe still means that which is being given to God freely and generously, but in the way that I explained before the break, and that is for the support of the church and the support of the clergy. And therefore, there is a necessity element there. There is a reasoned element we can come to. And I mentioned that canonists and moralists over the centuries have sort of talked through that, and it's some number. It's not 10%, 2.5% is thrown out. You could come up, but it's that which is not going to deprive those to whom you have your obligations, your family and your children, or those to whom you wish to, give charity. You're doing charity in the community and so on and so forth. So that could all be covered as well. So why a tithe is not strictly required of Catholics, the 10%, as many evangelicals conceive it at least, is because Christ did away with that covenant, quite frankly. Christ is the full and complete satisfaction of all those debts to God. So how do we pay that satisfaction? We go to Sunday Mass. This is why Sunday Mass has the weight of a grave moral obligation. In other words, under pain of grave sin, of mortal sin, we are, barring necessities, sickness, and so on, and other excusing things, we should go to Mass and we should pay to Christ, through Christ, our debt to the Father by offering whom? Offering up to the Father and Christ himself. And along with that, of course, we give our, quote, tithes for the support of the clergy, the support of the church's mission. So the concept is differently understood by Catholics than, say, by the Jewish people and their understanding of the covenant with God that they had, and by the evangelicals, of course, who don't then accept the church's theological and canonical history on these kinds of things. So the main point is to be generous with God, to be generous with your charity. Some people give to, Mother Teresa's communities, or they may give to a local mission that feeds people or clothes people, or do all of those things are part of that giving back to God. It's saying, thank you, God, that you gave these to me. I'm giving it now to others for their care. And all of those things can be considered, part of the tithe in the traditional sense. If you like to set a number for yourself and you want to set 10%, then that could be part of your considerations of your generosity to others in thanksgiving to God.
To the phones we go. First up is Josh today. He's a first-time caller in Livonia, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Josh, thanks so much for holding. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
What can we do for you?
So I called in response. You guys were talking about the statement issued from Pope Francis about the Latin Mass.
Sure.
So I do not personally attend a CLM church or Mass consistently, but I have many dear friends that do. And I know that this is going to upset them greatly in some way. I know it's not directly. It's still kind of up to the local bishop to decide. But
right.
According to, I think it's Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Vatican II document, it still allows for Latin or encourages Latin to still be used in the liturgy when possible. So I'm trying to, I guess, understand how the traditional Latin Mass is so out there that this
right.
has to be done.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of faithful Catholics that will be upset about this, and that's really sad to me. So that's my question.
Okay. One thing you have to get through your mind, and all of our listeners as well, this has nothing to do with the Latin per se. The language of the Old Mass is Latin because it's the Roman tradition. It's the Latin tradition. It's the tradition of the Western Church, as Greek is in many of the Byzantine churches, or Slavonic in the Slavic Catholic and Orthodox churches of Northeast Europe and Asia and so on. So it's not about the Latin. What it is about the form of the liturgy and its parts, the rites and ceremonies within it, which date in some measure back to Gregory the Great. They have roots before that, obviously. Pope Leo the First in the 400s is certainly, we have his sacramentary, Gregory the Great. We have his, and there were many modifications over time. And during the Middle Ages, the Mass had this general same form everywhere, because just the way the Eastern Church form of the Eastern Church's Mass in terms of its structure of a liturgy of the Word and the Eucharist and communion and Our Father and all these things. These are all very similar in all the churches because they come from the apostles, but they're clothed in the different cultures into which that apostolic teaching and the liturgy was brought. And so throughout the Middle Ages, you had a certain Roman tradition, you had a Gallic tradition, you had a Mozarabic tradition in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. You had in northern Portugal, in Braga, you had a Bragan tradition. In Milan, you still have the Ambrosian tradition. None of these are the traditional Latin Mass. So what had been done in the century before the Second Vatican Council is that there was an increasing desire to make, also because of the discovery of texts and the finding of texts. The same thing happened in scripture study, in archaeology. There was like an explosion of discoveries and knowledge in all of these areas, ancient codices of the scripture, for example. All of this has fed into the modern biblical renewal, ancient liturgical texts and more liturgical studies. All of this fed into the liturgical movement, which the church tremendously fostered. All the popes did. Pius X did his own part with certain elements of the liturgy, the office, and so on, and then different popes may have made minor changes. Pius XII changed the liturgy of the Holy Week. All of these were based upon discoveries. Now, there were a number of cautions all along. The idea was to recognizing that different elements of the past came in at different times and from different origins. This was not given to St. Peter and continued up to the day as it is. There are accretions, there were deletions, there were changes. The Roman Church, very lately accepted the use in the Creed, well after the Ambrosian, the Milanian Church, for example. The different things, the exchange of the sign of peace with the faithful came in sort of late. There are all kinds of things, and there are books written on all of this history. So the church wanted to, in the mind of the liturgical theologians anyway, was to let's get down to basics. Let's see what formed the basic structure of the liturgy. And so a lot of that work was done in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. The Second Vatican Council issued instructions for taking that liturgical work which had been done, and 2703-5, the bishops of the Second Vatican Council issued the liturgical 2703-5, that's within a few of the actual number, I'm pretty sure, said this is the guidelines for devising a liturgy that is revised based on all of these things. One of those elements, as you noted, is the use of Latin in the Mass. The Church did not say "and Latin in the Mass," but it did want certain elements made available to the people, the readings, for example. So it had actually been a practice already to do I remember this from when I was a kid, do the readings in Latin first, because that was prescribed, and then the readings were done in English as well. And so this was the practice. And so changes were then started to be made in 65, and then 67 and 8, different things, and then a new missal came out. So the desire was to use all of this 150 years worth of liturgical studies to try to create a form of the Mass that would appeal to the modern world and so on. So all of these good intentions. Now, lots of people have disagreement with the results of that, how it was implemented, and so on. Pope Benedict wrote books and mentioned this many times. But the idea, as some harbor, and this is what I think the Pope alludes to, that all of that is to be now thrown out and everything go back to 1962. It's simply not going to happen. Those are the people that he's targeting. It's not about Latin or the use of Latin. In every Roman missal in the church, in every place in the world where there is a vernacular missal, the text is in the back in Latin, and sprinkled throughout the main body of it is the propers, the things like the Kyrie, which is actually Greek, Agnus Dei, the Creed, and so on and so forth. All of these things which can be sung, as you see on the EWTN Mass, all of these things are in the current missal. This is not the issue. But for whatever reason, the Pope and his advisors felt it was necessary to put a break on these extreme positions that would say we throw all of that away, we find no fruits in it at all. Some even go so far as to saying that the Mass is invalid. That, of course, has been going on for many decades already. And so all of this is what is being opposed by the Pope. So whether we agree in principle with some of his conclusions and so on and so forth, nonetheless, it's an exercise of his papal authority, and it has to be observed, and the bishops will observe it. There will still be Latin in the Mass. EWTN will do its Mass. The Pope himself will no doubt on occasion offer it in Latin, and the Church will go on. Some will be unhappy because they're attracted to it and they love it, and that's no doubt going to be the case.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. It's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
The words of Blessed Carlo Acutis.
Do not be afraid, because with the incarnation of Jesus, death becomes life, and there's no need to escape. In eternal life, something extraordinary awaits us.
And welcome to an EWTN Bookmark Brief. I'm Doug Keck, speaking with author Philip F. Lawler about his latest book, Contagious Faith, Why the Church Must Spread Hope, Not Fear, in a Pandemic, published by Crisis, available through our EWTN Religious Catalog. Philip, tell us, what is this book about?
It's a book about the COVID lockdown and what it did to the Catholic Church and what lessons the Church should learn from the lockdown. My argument being that the Church should have been more active, and next time, if there is a next time, or when there is a next time, the Church could give people the perspective, the confidence, and the sacraments that they need to get through in a time of crisis.
Philip F. Lawler, the book Contagious Faith, Why the Church Must Spread Hope, Not Fear in a Pandemic, published by Crisis, available through our EWTN Religious Catalog. This has been an EWTN Bookmark Brief. We shall catch you next time. Thanks.
I still have my sanity because of EWTN and listening to your station. Everybody needs to listen to positive things. If you only listen to the negative things, it just gets very bad. If it weren't for your uplifting and wonderful people that conduct your programs, I don't know if I could still be not crying.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
Hi, this is Dr. David Anders. If you just don't understand something about the Catholic faith, Call to Communion is the show for you. Join us Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Now back to Open Line with Colin Donovan.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
833-288-EWTN. It's our toll-free phone number, 833-288-3986. Several open phone lines and plenty of time for your calls here on Open Line Friday. Colin, Marilyn is watching us on YouTube, and she wants your thoughts on parishes where both the Novus Ordo and the Extraordinary Form are offered. Will these parishes still need permission from the bishop to offer the Extraordinary Form?
Yes. Essentially, the faculty to do that will have to be renewed. One of the articles here I was just looking at, in Article 3, the main heading is the bishop of the diocese in which until now there exist one or more groups that celebrate according to the missal antecedent to the reform of 1970 is number one, this point I was making, to determine that the groups do not deny the validity and legitimacy of the liturgical reform dictated by Vatican II and the magisterium of the Supreme Pontiff. So I think That's the principal thing. If this is a sound and safe community, which has not been radicalized by some individuals with, these dire conclusions, then there shouldn't be any difficulty. But nonetheless, yes, each the bishop is to designate the locations where they may have the celebration in that missal, and to the days, and to appoint the priest who is delegate of the bishop, is entrusted with the celebrations and with the pastoral care of these groups of the faithful. So I think, especially I don't know how this will work out in the end, but I would say that in the dioceses where, for instance, the fraternity of St. Peter exists, I don't doubt that unless, a new bishop comes in, they have to operate, communities have to operate with the permission of a bishop anyway. If they're there, they have that permission, and I'm sure he will, I can't think of a reason why, unless some of these other elements the Pope is trying to quash are present in that particular group, or whether in the lay faithful or in others. So I think, yes, it all is going to go back to the bishop in most cases, but I think this first item, do they deny the validity and legitimacy of the liturgical reform dictated by the Council and the Magisterium of the Supreme Pontiffs? Talking about the primacy of the Holy Father, of the Pope. And a couple things can be noted. Vatican I did not just define the Pope's infallibility when he pronounces ex cathedra a dogma of the Church. It also defined his primacy, his universal authority over the Church. And that doesn't mean it's an authority that, although it normally operates through the bishop, although it normally operates through your pastor, although it normally operates through a priest that you go to, the Pope has authority over each person in the Church, and it's supreme authority. So it's an exercise of his primacy. That's a dogma of the faith. Whether you say the Mass in Latin, Greek, Polish, or whatever, is not a dogma of the faith. Put your faith first. This is an exercise of the Pope's primacy, as he may do freely. Doesn't matter whether we like it or not. Doesn't matter whether any Pope likes it. I think of a good historical case, and that is when Cyril and Methodius evangelized the Rus, and of course that's Poland and Russia and Ukraine and all of those Slavic countries now. He first allowed them to say it in the liturgy in Slavonic, and then he was, sort of talked into forbidding that, and then the next Pope came in and reversed that decision. Popes make these decisions throughout history, as history shows, all the time. And whether they're prudent or not, history will judge them. But nonetheless, they're exercising their authority to do that. And I think we have to respect that in the first place. And likewise, in the case of the bishops and so on. So I think this is the primary consideration, is if a group is of the mind that they're the Church and they don't have to obey the Pope, and the council is nothing to them, when it's a supreme exercise of the magisterium, whatever we might say about the various levels of authority in it, it is an exercise of that magisterium and that supreme governance authority as well. Then if you're rejecting that, what language you say the Mass in, is God going to be pleased? This is the thing that he has put number one in his document. The rest of it will certainly have consequences in some places, definitely where that mentality exists. But I would hope that bishops in pastoral charity would be very patient and tolerant in faith, and allow this to continue for those who love that liturgy. But they too are autonomous in this regard, and the Pope has given them that authority.
833-288-EWTN, that's our toll-free number. It's a free phone call anywhere in North America, 833-288-3010. 3986. Christopher is also watching us on YouTube, and he says, Protestants say the Mass is a sacrifice, and we are not to sacrifice Christ over and over again. I say it's an unbloody sacrifice, and we are also a sacrifice. He's looking for a better way to explain this.
Well, it's a sacrament. That's the first way. A sacrament is a sign of a deeper reality. So when we receive our Lord in Holy Communion, we don't say that we receive his body and blood and we're sacramentally united by means of this sign. It doesn't mean that we're, for instance, it's a condemned proposition that somehow we're breaking Christ's bones or something of this nature. That was a theory 800 or 900 years ago, and that didn't go anywhere, and the church rejected it. And so this kind of thing is not easily understood because it is at a level of the mystery. But in the liturgy, what we're doing is representing Calvary. It really is there, just as Christ really sacramentally, through the sacramental sign, is there in Holy Communion. We really do receive him, and the Mass is really there, is represented, but he's not being crucified again. He's before the Father in his glorified body. So you might think of it as, I think it's the letter to the Hebrews, that he is constantly interceding for us with his arms outstretched, if you want an image of that, and his wounds. And on the basis of that, the Father hears our prayers. Well, when we go to Mass, we are really and truly present at Calvary through that Mass, but we are not killing Christ again. So in that way, the Church says it is an unbloody sacrifice because it is Christ's own sacrifice, which the priest offers in the person of Christ, in persona Christi. And it's not like we're sacrificing him over and over and over again. Now, if you can't understand mystery, and who really can, then you can just reject that language. And of course, the Protestant churches did it. The English in Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer rejected the sacrificial nature of the liturgy. And when those priests died out, the English church lost holy orders because they weren't doing what holy orders priests were consecrated to do. Priests became ministers in that moment, with all of those ordained under that in that liturgy of Cranmer. So this is an important thing. We understand it to be a sacrifice in the way the church understands it, and not in some way of our own invention. So the church's way is actually very clear and very explanatory. The difficult part is it's very hard to really understand what a sacrament is, because that too is a mystery, and that requires some thought, requires some prayer, and asking God for the light of understanding.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Still plenty of time for your calls at 833-288-3986. Next up is Mike in the great state of Oklahoma, listening on St. Michael Radio. Mike, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hello, I had a question on the new motu proprio, Article 3, Section 2. It mentions a parochial church. First of all, I want to make sure if I understand that. That's just a regular parish church?
Parish church, yes.
Okay. So it says the bishop of the diocese is to designate one or more locations where the faithful adherents of these groups may gather for the Eucharistic celebration, and then parenthetically, not, however, in the parochial church, and without erection of any new personal parishes. So does that mean that the TLM won't be allowed in a regular parish church?
Now that's a good question, and I've seen that raised on websites as well, and even our own news websites. I think the exact understanding of that will get clarified in the coming days. On the surface, it does look like the literal meaning, if you will, is that it says without the erection of new personal parishes. So obviously existing personal parishes are not without some status and perhaps even some claim. But again, that's going to need interpreting and understanding. But it does seem to be that what it's trying to certainly forestall is that the extraordinary forms start popping up in other places. And there are certainly parishes that do both. And some do it like, I think, St. John Cantius in Chicago do it where they do both, and that's part of their charism. And so that might have a different status because it's a community established for that purpose. So all of these things will have to be worked out. But I think on the surface, your reading of it is basically correct. Some protection, as I say, for the all existing personal parishes for that for the extraordinary form. However, in the case of parish churches, that seems to be excluded. But again, I think we'll wait for further developments, if you will.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Excuse me, 833-288-3986. Linda writes in, explain why, if the precious blood of Christ is consecrated and blessed, why would it not be allowed because of COVID? I've been a Catholic for 60 years and never had the precious blood taken away.
Yeah, I might question her dating a little bit because that was allowed in the 70s. But anyway, on the basic point, it's not necessary for the reception of communion. Christ is whole and entire under each species, so therefore we receive him completely when we receive on simply the host. The church certainly sees that from the external, the sacramental sign part of it. Yes, there is a sort of a completeness. We have the representation of the sacrifice in the separate consecration of the two species, the bread and the wine. The bread being the sacramental sign of the body, the wine of the blood, and the separation meaning this is what happens in death. Our blood is no longer, at least in Christ's case, certainly it had all come out of him. So there's the indication of the passion. And as I said, we don't sacrifice him again in that bloody sense, but sacramentally. Likewise, in the Eucharistic species, we receive the body under sign or the blood under sign, but we don't receive just part of Christ. It's the whole Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. So the sufficiency of each species is a doctrine of the Church, and actually the Council of Trent condemned the opposite opinion, because some of the Protestant reformers were saying it was necessary to receive under both species. And the Church said, no, it is not. Christ is whole and entire under either one. In the 70s, it was permitted to receive under both because of at least it has this external sacramental sign is more complete, but it never became necessary. So for the sake of COVID, it was judged, at least in some quarters, that the distribution of the precious blood would be suspended. That only the priests, obviously, who are already receiving it as part of their ministerial role, would receive it. And I think that's probably still continuing in most places. Now we have the Delta variant to deal with, and we'll have to wait and see how all of that works out.
And really, this is primarily a North American phenomenon anyway, right?
Right. Yeah, I think we had a similar question last week. It's not something that is big overseas. If you go to a major shrine, it just don't have the capabilities of it. It's typically, even in many parishes I've been in, at least used to be the case, at the weekday Mass, because you have a small determinate number of people and it's easier to do it. It's more difficult to do it at a Sunday Mass if you have 800, 900, 1,000 people coming up for communion. In terms of the safety of the Holy Eucharist, and that has to be paramount. We don't want to spill the precious blood on the ground, as that would be to profane it. So great care has to be taken. And some priests just judge that, we can't do this safely, and so we're not going to attempt it.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Still plenty of time for your calls at 833-288-3986. Dave writes in, I know we say when Jesus returns, he will judge the living and the dead. I know that we are judged once we die, but what is this second judgment of the dead?
This will occur. You can call it the Great Tribunal. I think is a term maybe among Protestants more than it is in Catholics, but it's essentially what it is. The judge will sit on his throne, and we will all see history play out, and we can trust him this will happen despite our limited minds in some way, and for the glory of God and for the glory of human beings or their ignominy based on where they ended up because of their sins and their lives of sin. All of this will be out before the world. So at death, our fate is determined, our judgment is made, and we receive that reward, whether it's heaven directly or hell directly or heaven by way of purgatory. And then at the end, it will be like the summation of history, when we all see how God's providential plan of salvation worked itself out in all of its details. And that will be some kind of miracle. That's all I can say, that we'll all be able to do that. But he's God, and so he'll make it happen.
Be sure to check out Divine Intimacy Radio this Sunday morning. Dan and Stephanie Burke are in the middle of a great series. This is part 3 of the Exorcist Diaries. They are continuing their interview with Monsignor Rossetti on his new book, The Diary of an American Exorcist. That's Divine Intimacy Radio, Sunday morning, 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, right here on EWTN Radio. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Eric asks, what do Catholics believe of people who have passed? Can they see and hear us on earth? Are they watching over us?
Well, I guess it may depend on where they are. In God, we can see whomever God wants us to see. So there is no obstacle from that point of view. We don't have our eyes, obviously, but we have the bond of communion, as the just here on earth have the bond of communion with God. And in God, I think we will certainly be able to see our family members and presumably to pray for them. They can certainly ask for our prayers, and we know this because the Church approves of asking for the prayers of the poor souls in purgatory, devoutly asking for the prayers of our deceased loved ones who have a good reason to think are in heaven. We don't need a canonization process for that private devotion of doing. If that being the case, then I would think that they are certainly aware of what is going on, and they have a particular regard for us. And we have to remember that even some of the saints promised those who were particularly close to them. I can think of Padre Pio, in terms of all the spiritual children of Padre Pio, a group of people that he gathered during his lifetime, probably in the millions, I would think, over the years, knew about him and wrote him and asked to be a spiritual child, that he would be praying for them when he got to heaven. And so saints have said that kind of thing. And so therefore we can be confident that they are, and that our beloved who are with God already are as well.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. Aaron says, if in our fallen state marriage requires a special sacramental grace to live out our vocation, why doesn't the consecrated celibate life require a special sacrament?
Well, it does, in a way. Baptism. All of the sacraments are in some way a furthering of the grace of baptism. And so in the vowing and the making of a close bond, that we can think only of Mother Angelica and our sisters, who ignoring all the noise of their generation of women religious, still consider themselves brides of Christ, and God bless them, they should have. Because all souls are, as in the Canticle of Canticles or Song of Songs, we have Christ as our spouse, because that spiritual union is a marriage of hearts and a marriage of souls, not of bodies. That's for an earthly purpose, but of hearts and souls. And so, in a way, the primary relationship of the individual spousal relationship is with God, of every human being. and we either grow that in love and friendship as human beings do in their marriage, or they, walk away from it. So that spousal language is used of the union of God with Israel, of the union of the church with Christ at the end of time, is in the book of Revelation, the marriage feast of the Lamb. It's used by the mystics and by the doctors of spiritual theology in the church, like John of the Cross and others, Teresa of Avila, and so on. All of this language is used to describe this intimate relationship of love between the soul and Christ. And so that is where the power is coming from. It's that I give myself totally to the Lord, He's going to give ourselves totally back to Him. So you don't need a special sacrament for that, really. We all ought to be doing it in some measure. It's just the seeking of the perfection in doing it that the religious has chosen.
Jennifer is in South Lyon, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Jennifer, a couple of minutes left with Colin Donovan. What's your question today?
Well, I'll be as quick as I can. I have a goddaughter that lives in El Paso. She's 23. She'll be 24 next week. She is entering into the Catholic Church. She has a baby, married, and she has gone to a parish there that speaks English. There's very few. And she's attended a few times. This past Sunday was one of her first times on a Sunday. The pastor there told, I guess, quite a number of people that were kneeling right before the consecration, right before the offertory, to stand. And he said, there's no kneeling. You can kneel after the receiving of the Eucharist, and that's the time to kneel and pray, but not now. You should be standing. And my niece, just her jaw dropped, and she looked at her husband, and she didn't know what to say. She felt, and there was several other things, but that was the only liturgical thing that stood out to her. She called me immediately. I'm her sponsor here in Michigan, to say, why are we standing? That's the most pinnacle point of the Mass, and I didn't know what to tell her.
Well, there is an explanation. When the rubrics of the liturgy, there was a great revision of the Missal and of the rubrics around the year 2000. The rubrics came out in 2002. I think the Missal of the Bishops, the English translation, finally in 2008 or something like that. And one of the questions was raised is in the general instruction, in many countries of the world, in fact, in Italy and most of the world, during the Eucharistic prayer, they stand and they kneel down for the consecration, then they get up again. So that is actually the more universal norm. And in fact, along our border states, with people who have relatives in Sonora and the other Mexican provinces along the border, and of course in Texas, Arizona, California, and New Mexico, then the issue is, well, people come and go and back and forth across the border. We're talking about legal people, of course. But what they do they posture is one way in Mexico and another way in the United States. Mexico is closer to the universal practice, and the United States, with the bishops back in the 70s, decided to maintain the pre-Vatican II posture because American Catholics liked that, wanted that, and it was familiar to them. And so they kept that posture. So I think the priest was wrong because I think they should have the freedom to do that. It's a greater sign of reverence than standing alone, and that should be tolerated. But it is the posture of El Paso, I presume, to stand except for the consecration itself.
Colin, thanks for being so gracious with your time.
You're welcome.
On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our producer, Michael McCall, and our call screener and social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks for another great week of EWTN's Open Line. Have a great weekend. Back at it Monday. Until then, God bless.